After the launch of the W212 generation of the E-Class, Mercedes became afraid that their retro-inspired car was losing sales to the more daring alternatives put out by BMW and Audi. As such, Mercedes initiated a €1 billion facelift for the E-Class, quite possibly and probably the most expensive mid-cycle update ever. Mind you, a facelift is supposed to be the cheap way to boost sales of an aging model. If you're BMW, you call facelifts by the name of Life Cycle Impulse or LCI. Well, unfortunately, as I do have some remaining self-respect, I'll stick to calling them facelifts for the remainder of this video. These days, the average generation of a car is in production for about 5 to 7 years. But as each year starts rolling by, people become less and less interested in a car that isn't as new as it could be, instead looking towards more contemporary offerings from rival manufacturers. The solution to this? Facelifts. A facelift itself isn't usually anything groundbreaking. It's just a car that's already on sale being updated and not a whole new model. It's all nice and simple. Until you get to the 2005 Fiat Punto, which managed to get a new name every time it was updated. Sure, at launch it was the Fiat Grande Punto, but then in 2009 it turned into the Punto Evo, no relation to Mitsubishi. And then finally in 2012 it became simply a Fiat Punto. These mid-cycle updates aren't guaranteed for every car, however. Some of them can last their entire production runs by just relying on model year updates without ever receiving a proper midlife facelift. So the exact opposite of that would be the second generation Subaru Impreza, which was updated so many times in just 7 years that each face it had gained its own nickname from the community to differentiate them all. First up, the original New Age Impreza, as it was called, nicknamed the Bug-Eye for its large ovoid headlights. When this look was launched, it turned out to be so controversial and, well, disliked that pretty much immediately Subaru decided to draft in the designer of the McLaren F1 to come up with a quick refresh, which resulted in the Blob-Eye just 2 years later. But then Subaru decided that all of their cars should be ugly and slapped this front end on it, called the Hawkeye. So if you are in the market for a car that offers a choice of 4 different designs, then I cannot think of a better candidate than the second generation Impreza. Don't forget that it was sold as a Saab for a few years there. From a Hawk to a Saab, so diverse was the Impreza's design evolution. Going back to the Impreza's final facelift, both the exterior design and even engine selection were updated, and while in this case Subaru did refer to it as a simple update, other car makers have resorted, in the past and present, to selling mid-cycle updates as all new models. The new Camry, for instance. You've got the same platform, the same drivetrain options, and even exterior panels as the old one. Other examples include the likes of the Ford Explorer or the Audi A4 or the Tata Aria, which was reworked and then renamed to the Tata Hexa. Then you get to the Viper. Now there are 2 types of people on this planet. Those who believe that there were 3 generations of the Viper and those who are wrong. I will not be elaborating on this. These cars manage to blur the lines on whether they are facelifts or not. They should be under the basic definitions, but the manufacturers choose to present them and sell them as all new cars. However, what if there was a car that managed to experience both of these techniques? As journalists got their hands on the all-new 1990 Ford Escort, one thing started becoming evidently clear. Ford had mucked up. Sure, they'd spent over £1 billion on the new car, but it was unclear where the £1 billion had gone. Choosing the right colors for the brochures, perhaps? Because the money clearly hadn't gone to actually developing the Escort. The suspension setup became less sophisticated, the old noisy and harsh engines were carried over from the old model, and the interior was practically made of sandpaper. As Ford saw headlines like this rolling in, they got to work on what I like to call an emergency facelift. We'll get to more examples in a minute. But as a result, just 2 years later, the Escort got updated looks, new engines with fuel injection finally being standard, and that's about it. It was just an ordinary facelift that was pushed forward a year or two, which realistically just meant that they'd taken a year or two out of the current Escort's lifespan. But the Escort's replacement wasn't due to be released until 1998, and just having this thing sit around until then wasn't gonna cut it. Ford's solution to this was simple. They facelifted the Escort again, except that this update was now apparently the 6th generation Escort. So in essence, 2 updates, 2 different ways of marketing them. But at least the Escort was finally as good as it should have been 5 years earlier. As I mentioned earlier, a facelift is supposed to be the cheap way to update a car. So what is a better way to save money than to use parts from other cars? The 2024 update for the Honda Odyssey introduced a new rear bumper with rear reflectors taken from the Acura NSX. That's a supercar. But obviously that's nothing compared to the Indonesian version of the Mazda 323, the MR90. When it was updated, they decided to stick the headlights from the Mazda 626 onto it. But all of this pales in comparison to the GMC Acadia. You see, the Acadia shared its platform with the Saturn Outlook, which died alongside the entirety of the Saturn brand in 2010. But when updating the Acadia in around 2012, GM decided to reuse the entire rear of the body shell of the discontinued Outlook on the Acadia. So unusually for a facelift, they updated basically the entire rear section of the car, and also unusually for a facelift, they did it by taking the panels and windows and spoiler of a different car from a different brand that wasn't even being made by this point. After the tepid reception that the 2011 Honda Civic received, which resulted in it not getting recommended by Consumer Reports, Honda turned the Civic's fortunes around in just 1 year, as by 2012, the very next year, the Civic received a thorough mid-cycle update, which made it pretty good again. Just a year after its launch. I guess on the opposite end of that spectrum would be the original Hyundai Azera. It came out in 2005 like this, then it was updated for 2010, and an all-new Azera came out for 2011. A year. It was replaced after selling about 3,000 units. Other emergency facelifts include the likes of the 2020 Chevy Camaro SS or the Chrysler Sebring, which had gained such a toxic reputation around it that Chrysler decided to rename it to the 200. Then there's the B9 Tribeca, from Subaru once again. Just as a heads up, I will be showing a picture of it on the screen starting from now. The Tribeca was updated after just 2 years by incorporating the body panels from the cancelled Saab 96X, which was to be a rebadged version of the original B9. Speaking of cancelled, the world hadn't even seen what the 2015 Audi Q7 was supposed to look like before Audi decided to go through with a $260 million redesign before launch. Apparently, the original version was too brutal and ostentatious. I really need some Lost Media people to get on this, because I absolutely need to see what Audi considered to be too show-offy when this slab of chrome got to make it to production. But at least it made it to sale, just a little later on than originally planned, because the Rover RD60 project died after MG Rover was dissolved until it was picked up again by their new Chinese owners, where they started work on essentially facelifting the cancelled car in hopes of finally putting it into production. Well, that didn't happen.
Join the Corsicar membership program on YouTube today and receive exclusive content and the right to brag for decades to come. Tell your family, tell your friends, and join the Corsicar membership program on YouTube together to support your 57th favorite content creator. Just keep in mind, these cheap prices will last forever.